Hello, TechSummit Puerto Rico. Thank you so much for having me by video. I am so sorry that I can't be there in person for the summit. Giancarlo knows I would have been there if I possibly could. I wish I were there not just for the amazing beauty of Puerto Rico, and not even just for the wonderful group of people that you've convened, and not just because Puerto Rico is hosting a team of Code for America Fellows this year, but because of all that you are doing and the example that you are setting for everyone else who cares about government that works for the people, by the people, in the 21st century. The Tech Summit is an amazing, diverse group, made stronger because you are from different sectors and have different perspectives. But you are united towards a common goal, and that's a goal we share here at the White House, in all of federal government, in cities and counties and states in the US and abroad, and in communities around the world, whether they are communities of hackers, entrepreneurs, and small business owners, data geeks, neighborhood advocates, or just citizens. We are all learning the same lessons, and we learn them faster and with better results when we can learn them together. Learning is what I'd like to talk to you about briefly today, and I'd like to start with a quote from Clay Shirky from his talk at the Code for America Summit. Clay talked about how Wikipedia started out with an entirely different premise and didn't become the incredible utility it is today until it had failed at the start. Clay said, "It doesn't matter what you do first. It matters what you do next." Trying something, especially if you can try that something at low cost and low risk at a small scale, and then obsessively learning what your experiment is trying to tell you, is how most of the consumer internet companies were built. And the reason those companies appear to be so successful isn't that programmers are smarter than the rest of us, though many of them are very smart. It's that for every successful product or company, there are dozens that didn't make it. Instead, they learned quickly what didn't work, and they moved on to a new angle or a new mission. It's that famous Thomas Edison line in action, "I haven't failed, I've just learned 10,000 ways that don't work." Now, this idea is important to me for two reasons. First, I believe that some of the greatest gains we have to make as a society come from practicing this approach, not just in new endeavors, but within the largest institution in our country, the one designed to serve not its customers, but every citizen of this nation. I'm talking about our government. I believe government can do this, is doing this, and needs to do it more for the sake of those it serves. I'm proud and excited about all the ways that Puerto Rico is doing this. The second reason I care about this is that when you commit to that try and learn approach, it forces you to focus on one thing, the person or people you are trying to help. In the tech world, we call this person the user, and the business term is the customer, but you might as easily say the patient or the student or the defendant or the citizen, depending on the context. But what we're really talking about here is simply caring about what we put other people through. Whether it's the experience in a doctor's office waiting room or applying for financial aid, it's privileging the needs of human beings over the needs of the institution or company addressing those needs. It's fundamentally about showing respect for each other by constantly listening to those we serve and learning what works for them. It's about always thinking about what to do next to make it a little bit better. Last year, 2 teams of Code for America Fellows worked with the City and County of San Francisco to understand what it's like to enroll in CalFresh, the state's nutrition assistance program. As you would expect, they interviewed people enrolled in the program, but more importantly, they enrolled themselves. The fellows didn't qualify for the program, so a few of them got permission to enroll but not actually spend the money. Once they were enrolled, they started getting a lot of notices in the mail, notices that made little sense to them, in language they didn't understand, often written in all capitals. That's a good way to leave a ransom note, but it's a bad way to communicate. The fellows found that they were dropped from the program several times because they had failed to comply in some way, despite doing their best to respond to each of the notices. Each time, they re-enrolled, and throughout the process, they tried to imagine how difficult this would be if you didn't get your mail regularly, or if you didn't have time to carefully read each notice. They heard from the people that they interviewed what it's like to be at the front of the line at the grocery store, your purchases all bagged up, and find out that your CalFresh card doesn't work. Hunger meets humiliation at checkout stands across our country every day because our system communicates in a language designed for institutions instead of for humans. So the team tried a couple of experiments. First, they looked at ways of changing the forms, which turned out to be very hard. They tried creating a website that explained the notices to people that people were getting, but no one visited it. And then the team did a small thing. They built a way for the CalFresh program to send recipients a text message that said simply, "Your CalFresh benefits may stop at the end of this month. Questions? Call us." They tried different ways of wording this, and they tracked which ones resulted in more interventions, and found over time how to keep thousands of people from having that terrible moment at the checkout stand. Each step of the way, they focused on what to do next to make the experience a little bit better. This team did not follow a set plan. They started out thinking that they would work on a system to make the assignments of beds in homeless shelters easier. Instead of following the plan, they followed the needs of their users, and they found a place where they could make a difference. They iterated and they evolved. There's a narrative about power in our society in this age. As we've moved from an industrial society to an information society to a network society, we can all feel that power structures shift and change. Opportunities open up. Opportunities for the consolidation of power, of course, but also opportunities to make the world around us reflect our values a little bit better. Here's how I see it. There used to be planners and strategists and masterminds at the top, and people who execute those plans or serve the customers or do the actual work at the bottom, and a whole lot of handoffs in between. The word for it in the tech world, of course, is waterfall, because the plans get handed down through layers of process. But the world has changed, and the planners haven't gotten the memo yet. To quote Clay Shirky again, the waterfall method amounts to a pledge by all parties not to learn anything while doing the actual work. We saw how devastating the consequences of this can be when healthcare.gov launched last year. But the day the world realized the site didn't work for its users, some of the most intense, even heroic learning began. Learning that was so successful that the same team that shipped a failure on October 1st, plus some additions, managed to enroll 8 million people in healthcare by April 15th, 1 million more than the highest estimates. How did they do it? One way was by getting some of the best tech and design talent in the world to come to DC, join the existing team, and help fix the site. They stopped looking at their plans and org charts and contracts, and they started listening to the users, the people who needed coverage and had to navigate the site to get it. They listened to the data those users left, and they monitored it obsessively. This team dropped everything in their lives and worked in some cases 120 days straight, 18 hours a day to fix the site. Why would they do that? Well, I've talked to most of them, and universally the common answers are, they did it because they wanted their fellow Americans to have access to health care, and they did it because they are doers. So, planning up top and doing at the bottom and a long string of handoffs in between, that's the past. The future is doing, learning, and doing again, keeping what works and editing what doesn't, all the while listening to real human beings with real needs, trying to make their experience a little bit better every day. The future is policy, planning, implementation, and service in a dynamic, ongoing conversation. So you are all here at this conference to network, to build things, to connect, and to learn, but also put on your agenda to make a promise to disrupt that deadly waterfall and instead create a swirl. Make it your job to be the voice of the user, to speak for the needs of the people you serve, because if you don't, who will? Now, I live half-time in the world of tech startups, where there's a cult of the founder. But my heart, as you know, is in the world of public service, where people understand that at its core, government is simply what we do together. And here, when we say founder, we mean the founders of our country. The thing about founders, of companies or countries, is that they don't have just one job. They have all the jobs. And their number one job is to speak for the user, or perhaps to speak for the people. Company founders and the founders of our nation have another thing in common. Jack Dorsey, a founder of 2 companies himself, said it well. The founders of our nation had a lot of good ideas, but they had one really great idea, a more perfect union, and the realization that they weren't going to get everything right the first time around. because the work is unfinished, open to the future, open to change, open to evolution, that there is not one founding moment, but in fact, many. I believe that we are at one of those founding moments, a moment when we realign our values with how we run our businesses and institutions. Puerto Rico has been at the forefront of open data, of innovation, of civic entrepreneurship. At the Tech Summit this year, push those boundaries even further by committing to continually listening to each other, constantly iterating, and making planning, learning, and doing as dependent on each other as we human beings are dependent on each other. Remember, it matters what you do next. Thank you. Thanks to all of you, and thank you particularly to Giancarlo, and have a great conference.